And just being on the ground, I think the piece that things are, they change. They change daily as to what focus is here, what focus is there, what's happening here, what news came out there. So just being on the ground on a day-to-day basis gives you a better appreciation for how they put information out and how do you have to process it and then make a decision and move on.
That's really great what you just said, yeah, because it is when it feels like when you get these pieces of information, because you're working in a few different areas, you're holding space in different areas. And as we've said, like emotional exhaustion is real exhaustion. You feel it in your body. And especially for you doing this work in a few different fields, spaces, that when something comes in, it's like the first thing is we've talked about this reaction, and then it takes a while. You need that rest to really process it in order to give your real response, because your first reaction might be, to want to throw up, and then to actually take it in and get to the point of response. And that's really interesting in terms of what we said we were going to talk about today.
Sure.
Because in terms of really good community engagement, the opposite is true. It should start with listening.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Last week we did we did kind of an introductory piece on sort of what's going on the ground. I think when we look at these workshops, the long-term sort of idea is to, we didn't title them community complaints or stuff like that. It's community celebration, right? Bringing that back out, I think, in people that appreciate the history of the area, which we're getting, some info out on that, how this area sort of molded. We did the piece last week from looking at the mid-60s and that sort of turbulence of era. The 70s kind of were a blur to some people. And then, really the 80s started, kind of a change in the area. So, yeah, celebration is the key point, I think, in that, you can, I sometimes argue you can even sometimes celebrate something that doesn't go your way, if you put up a fight and people buy into that, there are groups of folks that really that care about this area immensely and want to make it better for everybody. So I think that's important.
Yeah, sorry, not to interrupt, but just what you said, yeah, celebrating when it doesn't go your way, because it's about the struggle, or if you want to use the word process, but it is about the decisions you take, that you took that action, that you said that thing, that you showed up. It's about that. That's often what makes the difference, that you did put up that, because sometimes you're not even going to know that how that impacted what came down in the end, the result. But celebrating that you took that action, that you did show up, that you did say that thing at that place, that it didn't feel comfortable.
And one of the things that I've seen in this area, there's a lot of celebration pieces that come from different organizations that have a stake in the area, whether it's sort of mutual aid groups or those social services groups. So they do celebrations of the community, but I don't think it's as meaningful as if it comes from the community itself, that they produce it, they create it, they have the ideas. A lot of times we do that. We want to push our stuff on folks in a good way, right? But it comes from us kind of getting ideas and then putting them out. I always look at a backwards method, getting the residents in the community to kind of come up with these sort of ideas of how they want things to proceed. And I wish, even with the issue that we talked about last week with the housing issue, that more people would have been involved, and there's a number of reasons why, and we won't get into that at this point, but those numbers really do matter. Because this is really a small community that we're talking about here on Avenue D, especially. Everybody knows everybody for the most part,
That's beautiful. What you're talking about reminds me of, like last week also, we were talking about in Native American and other indigenous communities, the wealthy person was the person who gave away the most, who found resources and gave them away rather than accumulated and just accumulated and kept them all. And I'm thinking of the pie chart. So I'm thinking of what's been happening in this community recently and what you just said about it's more meaningful and powerful and fair when it comes from the community itself, the people who live there, who have been who are expert problem solvers because they're closest to the problems. So they have the greatest wealth of information and knowledge and wisdom about what the actual, sections of the problem are, how to approach it. And they're likely to come up with the most innovative ideas. And yet too often, and I'm reminded of Ireland too, like Dublin City and national structures, when if you look at the pie, sometimes the community voice is the smallest part then. And people who are very well resourced and have access to massive resources come in to try and drive something, and then they limit the voice of the community to the smallest part of the pie. So,
that's an interesting point,
so
because
then not everybody gets to eat from that pie.
Which the pie that was supposed to be created for that very same group, that is a very interesting point, because the dynamics of that are something I'm still learning on how that process works. So, and then like you say, a lot of wealthy benefactors in this area, even going back to the days of Lillian Wald here, and downtown, that, the early people that put the money in were money people. She wasn't raising money from the community itself for a cause that obviously was, as a nurse, she wanted to take care of people. But yeah, a lot of that stuff comes, and then there's that's where the bureaucratic guidelines get in there, and we know that I think the way, the process that I think of it is producing results on the ground, I think, are the very measurement of how are we measuring success. And just seeing, if we met another 2 people this week, another 3 people next week, 5 people next week, the word gets around as far as what kind of work is being done. And different sometimes scares people in the sense of, I don't really know what the implications of me buying in is. Well, that is the very point, that you are in the conversation of trying to make change, trying to make things better, trying to come up with these ideas that maybe, when people talk about, I never like to use the term out of the box, but sometimes you have to think out of that cube. And it could be just one thing that stands out, right? But that's why the backwards design in my head works from, a lot of the ideas that we've come up with how to do things have come from the residents. We try to make it, we'll filter things out, but we want that to come back to us, because once somebody has an empowerment, that they have the power not to be dispossessed of thought, of mind, of voice, right? That's a powerful thing.
Yeah, power. And let's come back to that in a minute too, or later on, because we're going to have our guest, our neighbor, in a couple of minutes. And I just wanted to pick up on your mentioning Lillian Wald and philanthropic money. Some of the developments named after people like Simon Baruch and his son Bernard Baruch, who they had wealth, but Simon was trying to do really good things, and he, that was his work, was to make things better for everyone. And Smith, we'll get to another time, the Irish guy, Irish American, who got into politics. But how today fame and wealth seems to have it's completely shifted that perspective from 100 years ago, because it's almost like the people with the massive wealth think that they know best. And there's such a tension focused and so narrowly because of technological advancements in the past 30 years, because in the 90s, when the internet first existed, there were a lot of grassroots tech people on going, yes, we can make this better with this technology. And too soon it got co-opted. And now today, the people who have the most power to sway are the ones who are the owners of the big computers, or if you like, or the access do all of that, and then it's skewed because they don't actually know it all, and they don't know how to listen or ask. And some of the most interesting work I've seen done in philanthropy, because it's a fact that people who have the big money have a lot of power. They've got most of the resources. And the way now it's been turned into this kind of class-ridden system itself, philanthropy. But there's a couple of people doing really interesting work, and they're calling it decolonizing wealth. And some of the best advice I've seen lately is basically, if you meet people in the room and you like what they're doing, just trust them. Let go of the money and see what they do with it. Like a lean startup, just invest rather than try to say, I want you to do this.
Right.
So I'll fund you if you do this, but rather say, I'm interested in this, or I'm interested in you, or I'm interested in what you're doing. So I'll give you some money, and I'll, the best practice is I'll promise it to you. I'll give you 3 years or 3 to 5 years.
Right.
Because community work must move at the speed of trust, and that's slow. So you got to give it something like that, 3 to 5 years, and just let it go and see what happens.
Sure.
Because especially if you're, there are organizations funding a small group of people doing like out of the box or whatever you want to call it, doing different things, creative things, and not going with the flow. And that's where you're like really interesting things. I think people with money can really get excited about what comes back then by that kind of just ways to free up the resources and share it out in fairer ways. So, and that's why Kula is called foundation. We're not a huge philanthropic foundation, but the goal is that it's foundation, grassroots from the bottom up, and that we will be able to work with micro grants, so that's all.
And just the, the energy of, as an older person, I didn't give young people the credit I think that they deserve, but there's young people that capital can be financial, capital can be capital of spirit, capital of mind, right? Building that among, there's a time to go and tell people how you feel. There's a time to offer solutions. And there's a time to stand firm sometimes. So all three of those, I think, go in tandem with how people look at what's being done. Like you say, the 3 to 5 year thing. And sometimes it takes longer than that to first you get your feet on the ground. You got to have that trust. What are you doing? Are you doing this for yourself? Are you doing it for us? All those questions need to be clear from the get, right? I think one of the things that with some of the organizations that vibe on this is that there's good people doing good things. Now, the overall sort of mission statement doesn't vibe with that sometimes, being on the ground the way you need to be on the ground. Sitting behind a desk is not going to get you to the people.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you just said, and I hear, the true wealth is the people, because people who have financial wealth, that's a lot of resources. And I remember hearing somebody on a radio, a business show I used to listen to, saying, well, we're the business people, we create the wealth. They didn't exactly say that, but they were intimating that they're the ones who create the financial wealth, and yet the content they were taking was all created by the community.
Sure.
And so that's what we've seen with the big social media platforms, and we watch that in real time, where our content that we used to share in community has been taken online and now monetized and caused massive ill health. So it's affecting our perception of our real wealth, which is like in community. And then so the fame thing and the fame and financial wealth is skewing the perception, I think, for younger generations. But I think what our work has been is just create that space, in small ways, and increasingly we'll do it in bigger ways. Just creating that space for all the voices to be heard.
It's kind of amazing to me that I didn't realize so many people make their living off these platforms online. It's, you know, there are many businesses within the business of the bigger thing, right? I didn't even think about it that way. I guess I don't process it that way as far as, you know, I'm gonna do this to make money or live off this, right? I mean, it's everybody's right to do. We do live in this sort of open capitalist system where if you can make a buck, people will try to make a buck. But I just didn't realize how many people were tied into the financial piece, you know, when they had talked about banning some of these social media platforms. You know, there was a financial piece to that we, you know, we just don't see. So yeah, I totally agree.
So I see our guest has arrived. So I'm going to invite her in, and today it's Zulay Velazquez. Good morning, Zulay. How are you? Sorry about the delay there. Oh, look at that great image. Jacob Riis houses. We were just having a chat here to open up, and we'd love to chat with you, Zulay. Zulay lives in Jacob Riis houses. She's a resident, and she founded a community organization called Concerned Tenants for Jacob Riis, and she might be getting ready there for a couple of minutes. So I also have Jacob Riis's, I just pulled out the introduction to his book again, because Jacob Riis himself has been called kind of the first social worker, and his work was as a photographer, and he failed many times. I like to say that because he really tried and he never gave up and lived in really desperate circumstances with great deprivation. Came from the Netherlands and tried to get a start in different places, mostly on the East Coast. And eventually somebody gave him a break and he started taking photographs of people on the Lower East Side, around 5 Points, people, you know, sleeping in doorways, people living rough, and was a journalist, kind of one of the first photojournalists that captured the real deprivation in a way that people hadn't really been aware of before. So it was eye-opening for everybody in the community when these photographs got published in the newspapers. And then he got success through that by shining a light on how difficult things were for people on the Lower East Side. And then he put out he had this famous book of his photographs where he wrote an introduction and various chapters and talks about the transformation that he grew. And it opens up with, long ago, it was said that one half of the world does not see how the other half lives. That was true then. It did not know because it did not care. The half that was on top cared little for the struggles and less for the fate of those who were underneath, so long as it was able to hold them there and keep its seat. Discuss. Isn't it like?
You know, a lot of this stuff didn't get put out, obviously, in this is all print media back then. You know, him and then Upton Sinclair, I think, that wrote The Jungle, about the meat packing plants in Chicago. So this stuff kind of came out all at the same. And it impacted folks, you know. On the Lower East Side, you know, these tenements were cramped to the T with people, and you know, a lot of people were living outside. You know, kids, when we talk about, you know, how they structure with schools and keeping kids, a lot of this was, you know, a lot of youth were the parents either were, for any reason, were either working, were not there. So a lot of youths actually in this area in the turn of the century kind of lived on the streets and grew up on the streets on the Lower East Side. So you know, somebody that was living up in Long Island and in a nice mansion had either had no idea what was going on, or they were so displaced from that action going on that it didn't even trigger a response for that. You know, when we talk about philanthropy, but some people did see it and said that is awful, that, you know, human beings should not be living that way in a country that says that you know, everybody that comes in has a shot, right? That kind of vibe. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's a great opportunity for philanthropy because like what you just said made me think about projects we've done where I've talked with people, particularly in Ireland, where people say the government should blah, blah, blah. The government should do this. Well, they should. And they focus their strategy on telling the government what it should do. And that's often the first step, right? Because then you know, after a while doing this work, you realize the government's not coming to save a lot of things that need exactly, that need curing or need solutions. And so then, you know, our projects have focused on what can we do this year, this week? What can we do today? What small thing can we do? Because you mentioned power early on, and empowering is something that needs to start on the personal level, you know, empowering ourselves to go and do this work at like we were talking about at the very beginning, by taking care of ourselves, and then partnering with others and building collaborations, but empowering ourselves by learning. And sometimes people go, what do you want? And sometimes that starts, you could be blank in response to that, but start, well, I know what I don't want. And so you start the process of, I don't, you know, what I don't want. But yeah, a lot of people can get caught up. I mean, sometimes it's important and valuable to communicate with these systems. But I think what we find very meaningful is going, yeah, how can we empower ourselves in our community today? And I think sometimes I hear that sentence coming out of my mouth, there's never been a better time. Well, I mean, this is one of those times where it is a time to build power, because the power is always with us. We've always got the power. That's often what when I'm in a room with younger people, and I see our guest is ready, so we're going to invite her in a minute now to speak on some of these ideas and thoughts. But the power is always with us. But some of these actions that get taken against us, when the reaction, your power falls away, and you can have, and you know, it's designed to shock you sometimes. To go, what? We've no power, we've no agency, we've no voice. They're making this decision about us, without us. So then taking the time to rest and go, hold on, nothing about us without us. That's one of those slogans that is helpful to go, I have a voice, and my voice is important, because that's the way, you know, community is, humanity. It's about letting all the voices be heard. So building power, and it's creative. I mean, I think that's where creativity really
even when
comes
you
in.
disagree.
Exactly, as you were saying earlier on. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I actually, in my view, disagreement is better than just everybody being on the same line sometimes, because I mean, if you're not willing to expand and learn, then you're just gonna be part of the same structure that keeps things static.
Like real collaboration is, okay, we don't agree, but entering into process. And that was another thing that you brought up. And one of our Native American brothers from here on 10th Street, an organization of Native American artists here, said to me, reminded me, the work is never over. It's work that never ends. Like, we pass on, and if we're lucky, there's a legacy that we've been part of.
Well, the dynamic piece that you talked about, just being on the ground as, you know, these things are happening, you know, like we said, on a daily piece, there's shift and changes that are going on, but it's happening, you know, real time, which is, you know, I've been in New York a year now, and, you know,
back in New York,
and it's just been amazing, the things on the ground every day. So, and I see it as a good thing.
Oh, it's a great thing. It's a great thing, the Lower East Side community. And speaking of that, our sister Zulay. Good morning, Zulay. How are you? I think you're muted. There, you're not. How are you doing?
Hi, good morning. Sorry for being a little late.
Not at all. Let's start real easy and just talk about, how are you this week? How are you today? How are you feeling? What's going on?
I'm okay. A little exhausted, I would say. So we're just trying to.
Hello.
Yeah, it's draining. It takes a lot of work. You know, it's like sometimes you think it just takes a lot, and every day is something new. So you just gotta take it, I guess, one step at a time. But it's still a lot of things at the same time, overwhelming. You know.
Well, because you're a warrior, you have a powerful voice. and you're a giver, you give so much. So, you know, we've been talking this morning about, that's how we opened up. And you and I have been talking about, yeah, you just, you know, you reach a point where you have to take care of yourself, because you can't give to others unless you're giving to yourself.
Yeah. So, Susan introduced me. My name is Zulay. I'm a resident of Jacob Riis and turned community advocate. I've been an advocate before for injustices, but never Jacob Riis and never my community, unfortunately. And I think I always in my experience doing the activism, I always thought there was been times where I thought to myself, you know, maybe I should refocus on my community, right? But during that time, I really didn't think that there was a lot to actually advocate for. And thought everything was just like hunky-dory, to be honest with you. I wish I would have done a little bit more research at that time, but uh well, I did not. And so the reason why I started doing activism in Jacob Riis is because about a year ago, we got notices on the door saying that we were invited, all the residents, to a forum to introduce a program called RAPAC, which is Section 8. So they want the residents to learn about the possibility of converting over from Section 9 to Section 8. So they had a series of a few meetings. I had missed the first one and decided to go to the second meeting. But during this meeting, I realized that there was some people upset about what was being spoken about, and some people totally clueless. Me, I took the perspective of what's going on. Like, these people, this particular person wasn't from our community, but they're not letting us speak or listen to what's going on. And I now understand why the person was doing it. It wasn't so much um to not let us understand what was going on, but the person wanted to make sure that the person only gave accurate responses to the people's questions, and which is kind of fueled up this whole thing where it's like, wait a minute, is that person telling the truth? Well, it created enough doubt in my mind, but also I was paying attention to the fact that individual, which was as a consultant that was hired by NYCHA to conduct the introduction and process of these meetings, he wasn't answering all the questions. So he's been very vague. He wasn't, then he would only respond. If you had a two-part question, he would respond to one and then go long-winded, and then somebody, next question, So he would play these little games, for someone who is not used to some of these, I guess that's how, he gets through the meetings, right? That's how they must be planned, because they're only an hour and a half long. And though that may be fine for, let's say, for instance, a professional setting where you're in the office and everyone's on the same page, this is what we're going to talk about, and here goes the agenda. It's a little different when you come to a community that, unfortunately, not everyone may have the same level. So it sparked something inside of me. And then I had a few questions to try to follow up with it. And another way, directly towards the actual tenant association, one of the members. And but the following meeting was really what struck me, because they wanted us to actually write our questions on a piece of paper. And I was like, wait a minute, this meeting's only an hour and a half long. That's gonna take time, right? But then that also excludes the disabled. Because if someone who has literacy issues can't write, then they're not going to feel comfortable writing, and therefore their question won't be answered. So that was another thing. So what I started doing was started gathering with some of the residents on a weekly basis. And then shortly after that, we started petitioning against the privatization, because then I researched and did more homework, signed on to other groups that are doing this type of work against the privatization that's going on, found other developments that are going through this process who are having difficulties, like Fulton Elliott Chelsea, and was able to learn more. about really what was going on and find resources and information that gave me what I was looking for, where this is being done, what's the percentage of the the outcome, what residents are doing to fight back, have they been successful, what ways, and kind of like what to do moving forward. And so when we started our petitions, we started off with 2 against the privatization, and then we collaborated with the environmental attorney who's been with Jacob Riis since 2022, and he wanted to do 2 petitions against the environmental hazards at Jacob Riis, because there is a lot. And that's kind of like what we've been doing for the last year, is taking petitions against the privatization and against the environment. And I'm proud to say that we have well over 1,000 signatures. Those signatures are divided into the 4. And so, all we could do is try to push forward. Unfortunately, what's happening at Riis is really, it's not fair, it's not transparent, and is very deceiving. And Jacob Riis would not be proud right now at all. Jacob Riis will not be proud. In fact, this would be a very sad moment for him if he was still alive. And so I'm surprised that, not surprised, but he died, when he passed away, he left behind a legacy, and then the government just turned around and undid his work little by little. At least in Manhattan, because they had, in New York, in this, and his influence, right, is what kind of like helped his journalism, and his influence is what kind of structured the whole, like the laws and the acts to try to get these get the public housing, right, built. And so, it's difficult to see it just like wither away with someone's work that they've dedicated so hard for, right? And it's a sad time. People don't understand that what's really happening. They think that it's for the betterment, because what's going on is that they turn it around, the people that are between the actual consultant to actually Rad Pack. Rad is the actual, like, the federal name, and the state name is Pact, you know? And so they lied to the residents, but they know the truth, right? Because it's right in the NYCHA, like, website. So they lie about the 30%. Everyone's gonna pay 30%, of their income. No, not everybody's gonna pay 30% of their income. 30% of the income is only up to, their standards. Yeah, they might have raised the standard in some cases, but if you look at the Section 8 website, it shows, like, the different breakdowns in incomes. And if you make us over 120% of the average medium income, then you're gonna pay, anywhere from 50-80% of your household combined income in rent. And so that's a fair market rate for them. But at some point, if you go fair market rate, I'm sure that at some point it would be market rate, because they're 2 different amounts. And I think that that's just going to happen when the park is done, really.
Can I ask you about, because it's a perfect example of you knowing how you felt when these things were presented. So you've done all this Trojan work, like getting these petitions and engaging this lawyer and moving things forward and going, looking at a wide, intersecting things impacting Jacob Riis houses right now. Can I ask, like, when you ask those questions, or when you bring this great community work and you represent community voices by asking these questions, what kind of reception have you received? What kind of response have you gotten when you've presented these petitions or made these statements, in terms of trying to have like a call and response, a healthy engagement?
You can't have a healthy engagement with the consultant Rad Pack / NYCHA. You can't, because I've tried to do that, and it's like they keep calling me a liar. I just found out yesterday, You know, the power really lies in the people and they don't know that. So I'm gonna take that step forward for a second and say, you know, going out there to all these residents, it's sad and it's a combination of feelings, right? I'm happy to meet them. I'm happy to reacquaint myself with some of them because I've been in Jacob Riis for 46 years on and off. My whole life. I started off on A Street, and you know, my family moved for a little while, not long. And then we ended up, when we came back, we ended up in right on top of what I call Goliath, which is the old gas manufacture plant. And we didn't even know. So that's one of the things we can discuss, come back to, but um I get different responses. So like yesterday, day before yesterday, I got one man who said, I already voted. And I said, okay. He said, I voted Rat Pack because of the arsenic situation in 2022. And I told him, but that's the construction. Because see, a lot of people just think it's like, you know, it was a scare, it didn't occur. But it did occur, you know, it was a crisis. And what's going on is that when they break your infrastructure anywhere you are, or they shut off the water without letting you know to run it, or they take precautions certain ways, the water comes off dirty. And in some cases, it could just simply be, you know, it's that like they shut off our water. They're messing with the pipe or the oil pipe that's in our neighborhood too. Our vicinity is right on Avenue D and 12th Street. They open it up every so often. So our waters has come out with oil, you know, and that's what's gotten us sick, you know. Is there arsenic in our water? Yes, when they break our pipes, when they break our infrastructure, and they have already for the Sandy resilience, for now for the East Coastal resilience. And so I was trying to explain it to him, but I told him, you know, I gave him a piece of paper, which is this. I created all these different pieces of paper, but it basically says this visual information that I've tried to do for the organization, for residents at Riis to actually get awareness, build awareness, other avenues, and the media. And then these are different barcodes. And the first barcode is to actually a city hall meeting oversight on Rat Pack. And then there's the controller's report that there's more evictions under Rat Pack than the state. And then this was our newsletter that we create every month or whenever we have something that we want to share with the community. So I told him, I said, listen, I don't, based on the information you share with me, I don't think you had enough information. I don't know if you can take back your vote. I don't, because that's one thing. Like, what about those residents that after doing more homework, they realized that they were wrong and they want to vote the other opposite, you know, which is no for the conversion. I don't know, and that's something that has to be addressed. But when he told me that, I felt very sad because we should have at the very least got more information about the actual, for them, when you say the pros and cons, the only con to actually converting for them because it benefits them is the one that Section 9 don't have no money. It's not going to get funded. That's the only con they have to, and the con is weighing heavy on Section 9. So, you know, there's another resident, and so I will say that the people who actually, though Reagan started defunding public housing, that the same politicians who are defunding it could actually refund it. And I think that people have to, you know, like really go out there and try to reverse that mindset and impart that mindset. Most of the politicians, or they lead us to believe that is all they envision in public housing are basically the welfare queen and people who, that's all they envision. No middle class lives in public housing. And that's further from the truth. And I think in Jacob Riis, there's a significant amount of actual working class people. And this program, this program is going to definitely hurt the working class more. But it's not that it's not going to work the people who are low income either. There's a resident who just received a letter from, you know, she's receiving public assistance and her food stamps are going to be reduced because they say one of the bullet points was that she lives in a Section 8 building. Jacob Riis is in a process of the first development ever to conduct a vote for Rat Pack. And how is this so if we have not yet finished the vote? So honestly thinking, we don't quite have too much faith in this voting process. And when they initiated packages in the mail, they forgot the ballot. And so I kind of like, I reported that to the city council over a week ago, and they were not present, but I'm sure they heard all the testimonies. And so magically everyone started getting ballots 2 days ago, which is great. It's no, that is something that should have come in the mail, but they're also not mailing to specific people that they know they're going to get a no from. I didn't get a package. I got a ballot, but I didn't get a package with instructions. And they've tried to stop me and residents from engaging. One of the tenant association members tried to stop me from engaging with the residents, and we have proof of that. And then I just found out yesterday, which is great with the engagement, right? It's not just that I get stories that, okay, I already made my decision. You also get to hear stories like, wow, I was just robocalled a couple weeks ago and told not to sign anything from the lady going around knocking on the doors. So they're warning them not to sign my petitions, which is against the 964 federal rule for HUD. I have the right as a resident to organize, and they can't interfere with that. And there's one of the benefits that is going to definitely be weakened under Section 8. So if I wouldn't socialize with them and speak to them, I wouldn't find this out, right? They've not only defunded us, but they've also have stolen our money. They through bribery and mismanaging, losing money they can't find. But this goes as far back as the Reagan administration, because not only did he defund it, I believe that the Secretary of HUD, he didn't even recognize, but there was some conspiracy at that point too, where whatever was going on then, they were also making deals with the developers.
Yeah. I don't want to interrupt because you're such a great speaker, and this was great, just presenting your personal history of you and your family at Jacob Riis, and exactly the steps that you've taken, and it's such powerful work. And there's so much in there, and that was powerful testimony you gave last week at that hearing at the New York City Council public hearing on public housing. And we'll try and put a link in that in the box when we post this on YouTube, so people can see that. And a number of fellow residents from Jacob Riis were there as well. And I know you felt great community there. I've always, and because a lot of my stuff I've learned just from research, as I understand it, the defunding started in the 70s because of my studies of Baruch houses. So even before Reagan, but I'm sure with Reagan, it was a new step up into more of the system that we're looking at today, and also the systems, because we are working on systems change. The systems that we live under, like basically whatever you want to call them, imperial systems, part of that, the way they function is to create that scarcity mindset, to say you can't have it, there's not enough. And we were using this pie idea about everybody should get to eat from the pie. But now the community voice is, they don't always get to eat from the pie, or they get just scraps, because that's the system that we're living in, largely in terms of physically, anyway, financially, certainly, in terms of land. And I mean, when we talk about, as we have, who this land really belongs to, and then, again, learning about Lower East Side NYCHA, it was built for working families. People, all the stories and footage that we've had access to recently of working families moving in the 40s, 50s, and being really proud, because it was, when it was properly funded. it works really well. And the buildings themselves are actually quite, I wanted to use that word robust, but I'm not sure about that word robust in the recent way we've heard it used. But the structures themselves are sound. It's the upkeep that has caused problems recently. The repairs are not being done, are being withheld maybe, they're certainly not being done at the rate they should be. And we've seen evidence of funding tranches coming down that haven't been used.
And to your point, Zulay, we see it as an intentionality of these things. These things aren't happening in a vacuum. They're choosing to make those robocalls saying, don't talk to these people, or these people are not giving you the right information. They want to stagger the voice of the residents and keep them as confused as possible before they make that decision, because they know when you talk about this vote being rigged, when you only need 20% of anything, that you don't have to hit everybody, right? Once you think you've reached that threshold, then you don't care who else votes, right? So it's an intentionality of trying to quiet people, trying to get people just to trust us. And it's an oppressive sort of way to say that you're trying to do this for the people that are there, but at the same time you're shuttering their voice, right? So they don't mesh.
And then I remember the last piece was the lack of transparency, because during that hearing I heard that said again and again. It was shocking to me to hear that the New York City Comptroller just finished that audit in December 2024, and that got read out. And you and I were comparing because we had done similar handouts to try and get this information out, simply because people have not been given the information which they should be given in terms of full transparency and real robust process. So that was stunning what the audit of the New York City Comptroller found, and we have all those points. And then that Human Rights Watch had done a study in 2022, also citing gross, obviously mismanagement that led to the situation and lack of transparency. All the information is not given to empower the tenants to make a really informed choice. So that's really clear. So that's lack of transparency was that other point that I want to bring up.
Yeah, so what happens is like more to your point earlier, what you asked me, I'm sorry, I get carried away. It's so much information, right? But when you ask questions, they deflect, and they kind of like, they try to like go long-winded, as I mentioned earlier. But what happens too is that when you become too vocal, or you're like, well, wait a minute, you're saying, this, can you clarify that? Or, then they say you're complicated, you're difficult, we're going to kick you out if you speak up. So that's your freedom of speech they're tampering with too. Like, so you become labeled as a problem person, because you have difficult, they know the answers. They do this everywhere. They must go through this training and their book where they do this deflective kind of like training, so they can do this deflective like presentation to residents, right? Especially the ones that are more alert, or that it just doesn't click for them, right? And the tenant association meetings is almost the same thing. I mean, I have evidence of several people, not me per se, but people have evidence of people charging us, coming straight to us to create a situation where it becomes hostile, so they can then end the meeting. We're not the troublemakers. We're just being honest about the situation. They don't want to hear anything that you have to say that counters anything that they want to do, right?
Certainly, the way the engagement was done in terms of what you call best practice or good practice, it's not, doesn't sound like it's serving well. That whole piece about only needing 20% of the people to vote to make a decision, that sounds very poor. And then also the other big piece I'm hearing is that when that work that's really well resourced and well funded isn't carried out well, it pushes such a weight onto the residents emotionally, spiritually, I'm going to say, but also physically and financially, because here are people, you know, residents having to do all this work to unearth the whole truth, to get the facts, to disseminate it by going around door to door and share the actual studies from the city and from Human Rights Watch, share the actual facts so that real, robust, informed choice is made. And that's real labor that you're not being paid for. But it obviously created this gaping chasm where you were like, we need the truth, the full stories to be out here and to be shared. So you have been doing this work.
You know, so how do you input or output information? What you get in from your research, how do you put that out there to people? You know, they don't want that stuff. You know, you like you said, you're citing that you know, it's in their best interest to make the people counteracting their argument look like they don't know what they're talking about, right? That's all part of their playbook, right? And if enough people hear that, it works to their advantage, right? I mean, we do know that even in with the TA and all that stuff going on, that they have no interest in in being on the side of residents, because if they were, they wouldn't even allow this thing to come in, right? That kind of vibe. So, yeah, it's a misinformation campaign, or like you said, I mean, when you talked about writing the questions, I don't know if you remember, I wrote a question out at one of the meetings, and they edited my question that I asked. At that moment, I didn't, it was kind of like shocking that somebody would even do that, right? But that's just a little piece of what they do. So imagine putting that on different scales where, you know, that trust issue between them and the residents is gone, right? So what they got to rely on now is who, you know, let's get that 20% of PAC, right? We've seen court cases too where they've tried to reverse these rulings. Some judges have thrown them out. So it's hard. You know, my philosophy to people is the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's not going back in. So you have to be able to make that informed decision. And you're right, you know, the knocking on people's doors is the only way to do that. And they don't want folks to do that, right? They want folks to, you know, just believe what they say. So it's an intentionality of, and it's a systemic system. It's not just housing, okay? This is a systemic system that affects everything down the line, especially if you're in that lower income bracket, or like you said, middle class folks that are working here, you know, that pay $3,000 a month and they're still not getting the repairs. So being somebody who pays a higher percentage of their income to rent versus somebody who doesn't, they're still both getting the same treatment, which is nothing. And that's why they say, well, now with this private thing, you'll get something. We don't see that as the case.
Definitely, I think it's just like, not just like management. I just want to highlight the fact that Riis specifically was involved in the 70 case bribery that happened in 2024. They arrested about 70 people on bribery charges for NYCHA residents. NYCHA employees. And that's not the first year that's happened, but this year is obviously the closest year. And so there were people from Riis that got arrested. And so you know, and that's just saying, like, you know, how deep it goes in, we don't know, but you know, it's bad when it's like, I only give you a job if you give me a cut of this job, and then that developer doesn't hire proper people to do the repairs. So that's one way where Riis has, you know, fallen off track worse than some apartments worse than others.
But
But
just
they've
to be
created.
clear, that's what was happening at Riis, probably, you know, maybe all along, but definitely leading up to January 2024, that NYCHA employees at Jacob Riis houses were bringing in contractors and taking money illegally and making decisions themselves And that's why, and it was that bad that they were arrested.
And so in addition to that, we have pointing that hasn't been done in over a decade. And so I think that, you know, it is in regards to the roof. So we have a few situations that occurred that have made our situation worse in some of the residents' houses.
So it sounds like, you know, there's a lot of issues that have compounded and been allowed to. And is there much communication about this? Do you ever get like a newsletter or an annual report saying these are the issues we're looking at and we know we can't fix this right now, but we're working on this, or to give you more information about things like the pointing?
They don't, as far as I know, what's going on is like individually they tell people. But as far as I know, I haven't gone. So like the only time I really started becoming active and going to the tenant association meetings has been since this Rat Pack has come out.
Okay.
And for the main part, you went to the meetings and all they would try to do is stuff Rat Pack down your throat still. So even though they're not going through the engagement pieces, now they're in, and they go into every meeting that we're in because it's housing real estate. So it's like they're Rat Pack and they're in all our meetings. And the only thing I will say is that and a lot of residents feel that's why they don't come. They've told me, like, why should I go? It's just the same thing. You know, they're not talking about business that has to do with Jacob Riis. Like, we all know what's going on in these apartments.
You know, the history of how people have been living and things, any events that have been happening are part of the history of the land.
Here is the thing at your point. NYCHA hasn't done any part of their job. You know, when they say, well, we have to move on to do this or do that, the first piece is you doing your job that you are contracted to do. You can say you don't have money, you can say you don't have this. So I mean, that's why I look at it as an intentional sort of, let's not do the repairs, you know, in order for it to get worse, because some of these buildings should not be in the condition they're in, or apartments, after they supposedly sealed these roofs. Well, what they did is they hired the cheapest contractor to do it, like they do with the kickback scheme that happened in January. And so now they're saying, oh, but it's under warranty. But yeah, when are you going to get it fixed? I talked to a resident on the 13th floor, basically has a gushing waterfall coming through his apartment. So, and then they have not addressed that. So, okay, you just live like that, you know, and then they expect you to pay rent while you're living in these conditions, right? So just to get back to your point on that, it's an intentional piece. NYCHA needed to do their job before they kind of, you know, they're just expecting, look, people will forget that we didn't do our job and let's move on to the next. But NYCHA's still going to be involved in this process, right? They're not going away. They still own the land. And they want somebody else to clean up that mess on 12 and 13th Street, which we know you know, that steam and that 1115. Okay, let's just say it's just steam.
It's not just steam.
Okay, but let's just say that it was, right? The quality of life of people living in that building on a daily basis, getting hammered with this steam 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, I talked to a lady the other day when we were at the meeting, and she lives on that side of the building. And then like you said, she hasn't gotten any notices. They haven't told her, you know, to do anything. It's just steam. You're okay, right? So that's an intentional sort of piece that they throw in there too. Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it, right? Which we know NYCHA does not do.
In regards to me, I will continue petitioning. I encourage people to do more research on their own. People want to say I'm lying. I tell them, just prove me wrong. You know, do your research. If you don't understand, ask somebody else. You know, we'll continue petitioning. We'll continue to, I hope that my testimony was the reason why people got ballots in the mail. And we're just basically asking people to notarize their ballots and make a copy of it for their records in case we want to go into court and say, show us the proof. Show us how you came up with this. We want to see the proof. And I don't hide that, you know, because there's nothing that doesn't need to be transparent. There doesn't need to be a secret, you know, especially since there's no oversight. The only oversight that is going to be here is NYCHA. We have to trust that NYCHA that's failed us this far to be the responsible party to report to HUD when Rat Pack is not acting accordingly. That is a joke, but people think that somehow there'll be a difference and RADPAC could not possibly do this. So therefore, they hear them say, oh, that report from the controller is not true. Anybody who sees that lady's testimony from the controller's office tells you, after several attempts of trying to get the information straight from RADPAC, they refused or delayed or retracted a lot of information. They themselves had to go to housing court and retrieve these records. So that's facts. Those are not things that they would have made up. That's also public information. So, it's pretty hard to say, how you're going to tell me I've done my own homework, and my own homework is not just hearing it from, John Doe. It's from actual factual people in court with real judges. And so I think that people have to just really like be more objective, not to take one side or another, but just to get the truth. And they really think that this conversion is going to change, and it may change a little, but they're looking at other developments and saying, well, two things. One thing, we want that, and they want to change. And who doesn't want change in a better life, right? But they're also saying that the negative is not going to come here. It's different in every development. It's just not going to happen here. But they've signed off. They don't care after that. Even our rights through the 964 regulation is being violated on. And we see that with the meetings that they don't let no one come in, but they're public. We see that with them making this robocall, don't sign anything from that lady, who's going around. They see certain things that are occurring that changes. They're trying to change those regulations right now for the tenant associations to weaken the power that the residents have to actually help the resident association, or like the protections, to weaken the power that the actual residents have under these regulations that have taken decades to create.
Yeah, it's 500,000 units that NYCHA has. Something like 50,000 have already been converted. They want to end public housing. This is the last big city that has public housing. They want it done away with. And to your point on the integrity of the vote, we don't know that the integrity of the vote is there. We don't know that. And like you said, they don't have to tell people not to vote either way or another. When you have that lower threshold, you don't have to do that much work to muffle the issue.
But I will say this, RADPAC does not have a vote. RADPAC, NYCHA could just, the way Simon said in City Hall, NYCHA makes a decision. What happens is that they use the tenant association to make the decision. So either you want it or not. So they're trying to say, even though the tenant association doesn't want it, Dr. Crawford, right? Dr. Crawford or Crawford, yeah, from last week for development, she doesn't want it, but they did it anyways, or they're trying to do it anyways, right? But she said no. But that's like, in some cases they've said okay, but they come back every couple of months, or okay, we're here again, peekaboo, like, do you want us now? Do you want us now? Like that pressure, like, you want us now? You want us now? Come on. Okay,
Right.
no, leave, go away. But Riis, the tenant association, did one thing, and they said, well, you know what? Our residents must vote. But they want this conversion because they want the change, and they want the riffraff to go away. But with the riffraff will go a lot of people, more people than just the riffraff. And that's where they're not realizing. Even some of them who actually elected to do this process and allow this to go on, because that's not part of their plan, right? It's just not part of their plan. I just really want the residents to really do their homework and get more involved and become more vocal. And I hope that we see more and more residents come forward, so Jacob Riis it could be a better living situation for us at some point. And I hope we can live in better living conditions, and and I would like to see a park where the kids are not being poisoned.
I think from that point, that's also a whole different sector that comes out, where I almost feel like residents might become more engaged after, whether it stays Section 9 or it stays or goes rad, right? Because like you said, they're gonna do exterior work first before they start working on any of the apartments. You're right, could be a year or two. And then they're gonna focus on the privatization piece to clean up the toxic land, which again should have been done by others. So I think positive of that sort of resiliency is that folks don't just after the vote just don't do their part. I think that's almost an opportunity to get more folks out and have these conversations, have these events, make it pleasant for them to attain while receiving this information that's valuable, right? So I mean, my long-term goal, whenever I make it a point to say hi to everybody I see every day walking up the app, even people I don't know, even the dogs, I say to everybody. I part of that is there's a lot of the times the beef is that folks will come in for a short period of time. If their agenda doesn't go the way they want, they go. I think what we want the people here to know is that we're not going anywhere. Stay here, and we're going to bring more of those people into our circle. And so this is we've been pushing is, imagine if 30% of the residents here got into a consortium of thought. It's a large number, right? That's powerful. So, look ahead. I think that's the way we have to sort of approach this
Yeah, and
project.
in terms of that celebration piece or enjoying, because everything in community, in relationship, like, and as you've described to me, how you feel with your relationship, NYCHA, with these people coming and presenting Rad Pack, you know how you feel, and that's why you've taken actions, because you've wanted to know more. And as you were saying, Zulay, prove me wrong, because you need more sisters and brothers out there joining in community to get sharing all these pieces of information. That's starting to happen now. So it's a whole shift in the energy and the history of this community. So it's almost like there's an opportunity for more things to grow. And then people, like, how you feel when you've got all the information. Something, that's what I was thinking about when you were talking, just wellness, how when you feel good, even if the information isn't good, but if you've got all these flows of relational, of different voices coming, we feel good because we're, okay, well, now we're all sharing this information together and we know what we're facing, and you feel empowered that way rather than voiceless and disempowered. So this is really hopeful. We are going to wrap up because it's an incredible conversation, and to end on a hopeful note, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next few weeks with sharing this and hearing more of the voices that of the people we're going to meet in the community responding, and see how this wraps up and how more of the voices are heard and listened to, because something's begun out of this, out of the work you two have done, and others within the community, but particularly like out pounding the pavements, you two have really taken it on and created some new energy and new relational stuff within Jacob Riis houses. So it's part of the history now.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, and talking about the piece of getting folks to be more involved in this. I think, like I said, I think our opportunities are even greater after the vote, because we can plan some of these things with now what we know, right? Getting this information is tough, and we can present that to residents in a way that's even, I've thought about, if we did decide to do something big in the amphitheater in the early summer or something like that, where we can have people invited. The people do like to get their voices out. We can present it in a way that it's an enjoyment piece, but it's a piece that has a serious overtone to it, because there's consequences either way. I think the way we look
But you
at it.
need to have fun.
But you need to have fun, the right of the people to tell the powers that they are not doing their job is absolutely implicitly needs to be done. On the other end of that, you need to be able to get residents to know that they are a viable piece of it. And some through that, it's just laughing sometimes, even at the bad stuff, it's not. it's not in our human nature to be, you know, still all the time, right? We don't want to be like that.
We got to feel all the feelings, all the feels, and enjoy, yeah, the struggle and the work that's being done. And I always enjoy this community work, particularly here at Jacob Riis, and it's changing. It's changing history. It's changing the energy right here on the ground right now.
Well, I
Thank
will
you,
say,
Zulay, for guest.
yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. But I look forward to discussing more with you guys. Thank you for having me. And, you know, I hope you have a productive day, rest of your day.
So yeah, so next week there's another series of the last in the series of this first section, and it will be next week at the same time, and we titled it El Pueblo es de la Gente. The community is of the people. Maybe we'll have a little bilingual piece in there. You know, creating the future that we want together, right? That's a big sort of step into how we move this. And you notice in this whole talk, we have not referred to any politicians that are doing whatever work they do. You know, part of the independence piece, I think, is that our talking points are our talking points. You know, there's nobody throwing stuff in the back of our ear. We've learned what we learned by being on the ground, not through a third party and stuff like that. So I think that's an important piece. And it's hard for people to gain that concept of how hard that is. But it's work that's fruitful if we're tying it in with the resiliency. We have to have that piece in there all the time. It can't go away. So that's next week, and thank you.